topic of this evening is ethics for healers, and it matches with the psychopath week that we visit traditionally in class 4 at Brennan School, because there's a big difference about needing to be right and feeling the sensation of being in the right. Wanting to be right is a big pressure on the system. It eliminates other people, because if you're right, then another person is wrong. But being in the right is a more wholesome, fulfilling sensation that invites other people to also be there with you. And it certainly doesn't destroy them just because you have the feeling that you're in the right place, time, decision-making process. So what I'm going to offer to you are things to think about, some things from ethical theory, but also lots of dilemmas that we're going to go through together that come from my client practice. So things that have really happened that we are going to talk about, and you get the opportunity to explore how you would have responded to those. And the point of today is that you are going to be discovering your own ethical compass. What is it that guides your decision making in life? What is it that gives you the feeling that you are in the right in the decisions that you make? So if you have pen and paper or something else to write some things down on, that will probably help you as we go forward. You don't need them right to begin with, but you will need them relatively soon, because we're going to keep scores of some things. So because I can see some of you, I know that some of you are going to get paper now. So I will wait a moment until everybody's back here. Good evening to those who've just joined us. If you want to have your video on, you're very welcome, but this is being recorded on YouTube, so you will be broadcast later on. I'm very happy to have you on the screen with me. I was a bit lonely yesterday, so I'm happy to see some faces that I can talk to other than myself. So, pen and paper at the ready. Here we go. So why do we care about our personal ethics? Can we not just wait for the law to tell us how to make our decisions? Surely the law is a basis that informs us about what is right and what is wrong. So why would we spend time investigating this so-called moral compass of ourselves when there is, in theory, nothing for us to think about, when the law has already laid all of this down? Well, let me tell you, according to the law at the time, the Holocaust was legal. Hiding Jews was criminalized back in the times of the Nazi regime in Germany. Slavery was legal at the time that it was happening. Freeing slaves was criminalized according to the law at the time. And segregation, racial segregation, was legal when it was happening. And protesting against racism was criminalized at the time. So do not mistake legality for morality. I'm not saying to become subversive against the law, but what I'm suggesting to you is examine, according to your own moral compass, where the decisions that you're making are coming from. Is it just based on what you're being told, or are you checking in to see if it aligns with what is true for you? So here is an example from somebody who did what she knew was the right thing to do. Rosa Parks. You may know her from this photo here. She said, "You must never be fearful about what you are doing when it is right." And the story of Rosa Parks, the part that she was famous for, was that she happened to be on public transport. I don't remember whether it was a bus or a tram, but in any case, there was a colored section that she was supposed to sit in, being a woman of color. And there was a white section. The white section filled up and there was no more space. So the driver went to Rosa and said, "Please vacate your seat so that this white passenger can sit down in your seat." And she refused. What then happened was she was arrested for civil disobedience, for refusing to give up her seat in the colored section to a white passenger, just because the white section was full. And her case was chosen by civil rights movements because it had a pretty good chance of succeeding in court, of testing whether that kind of segregation could still stand up legally, and she won. Her attitude in that moment, where she refused to do what the law was telling her, was the beginning of mass movements of civil protest that ended up with the law being changed. So this bus company, the transport company where this happened, was actually boycotted for over a year by all the passengers of color. And it created such a financial pressure on them that they all also had to become part of the movement for change. So it's important to feel into what is right. And so you might say, well, if I can't trust the law in the moment where things are happening, then surely my religion or my spiritual path can be trusted to dictate the direction that I should go in. Now, I say this almost rhetorically because I'm sure you can all think of very good examples where spiritual paths or religions have created situations that have been incredibly painful for the people involved. I've just chosen two small examples, but there are many, many others. Do you know what this is? Can you see the crosses on the people who are fighting? These are the Crusades. So the Crusades were, it's about 1,000 years ago where the Crusades began, the fight over the holy city of Jerusalem that passed hands from Muslims to Christians backwards and forwards a number of times. Now, this picture here is something that not a lot of people know about the Crusades, which was that as the noblemen from England and France started to come together to journey to Jerusalem, to take back Jerusalem, to protect Jerusalem, they started practicing their massacre skills on the way by going into cities in Germany and elsewhere and killing Jews. So the first victims of the very first crusade weren't Muslims, they were Jews. Just in the name of somebody practicing their skills for once they got to their so-called holy fight. And there were between 1 million and 3 million Christians, Muslims, and Jewish people murdered during the course of the Crusades that carried on for, I think, something like 200 years. And there are many other examples of so-called holy wars and inquisitions and so forth that have been done in the name of a religion. And a more recent example, cake. So recently there was a court case about a baker who refused to make a cake for a gay wedding because according to his religion, he's not allowed to condone homosexuality. So therefore he wouldn't make the cake. Now that was overturned in the Supreme Court because it's discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation, which in the US is outlawed legally. But in the UK, there was also a cake story where a baker was asked to make a cake and write on it something like celebrate gay rights. But because the couple who ran the bakery were Christians of a tradition that didn't support homosexuality, they refused to create this cake. And they were actually, in the UK Supreme Court, supported because they weren't discriminating against the people who wanted the cake made. They were exercising their freedom of speech by saying, I don't want to write that on something because it's not something that accords with my beliefs. So you see, even the spiritual path or the religion that you follow may not give you answers that are perhaps so clear, relevant, or even kind towards the society and other people that you live in. So who can you trust? Where do you get this from? Well, surely then, if all else fails, you can trust your professional association. So when you graduate one day as a healer or a therapist, you will be members of some kind of professional body that you have a code of practice to follow with and so forth that represent you legally. And every professional association has a list of ethical decision-making principles that you need to follow. So surely you can rely on that. Well, in the UK, there are very specific reasons for breaching confidentiality. Confidentiality is what is private between you and the client. Whatever the client says to you normally is covered by confidentiality. You will not go telling other clients about that. You will only tell your own supervisor on the basis that the person is anonymized. Here are the only reasons that you are legally required to break confidentiality as a counselor under UK law. If the client discloses activity related to acts of terrorism, drug trafficking, or money laundering. Those are the only three where you have to break confidentiality and report the client to the authorities. Child abuse, murder, rape, and so forth are not on the list. So it's very surprising. You would have to make up your own mind. Now, according to other parts of UK law, you're allowed to break confidentiality for the reason of serious crime, but you're not required. Those three there, terrorism, drug trafficking, and money laundering, is a requirement that you do it. So you would again have to sit with your own moral compass and decide, if this client is telling me about some abuse, murder, rape type situation that they have done or that they're planning to do, what are you going to do about that? Because you are not necessarily covered by your own professional association. Okay, complicated, right? So this is why we need to think about these things. Now, sometimes all of this feels a bit overwhelming, and I have days where I just think to myself, that's it, I've had it. My life as a therapist and healer is too complicated, and my go-to is always, I'm going to work in the supermarket, just stacking the shelves, or as a checkout person. How complicated can it be? But even these days, you could risk your life because of coronavirus. So I don't know. It's complicated, all this. And we can easily find the place in ourselves where you just say, well, you know what? I'm just not going to get involved. You know, like all of those big problems, I'm not going there. It's too much. I can't handle this. So I'll just do something where I'm never going to be exposed to decisions on that level. Well, here is a quote you want to bear in mind then. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. And that was Edmund Burke, an Irish statesman and philosopher, who said this. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. And this is something that I probably don't need to illustrate to you in a great extent historically, because movements, for example, like fascism and Nazism arose. And it was only when everybody was starting to be affected that the problems, the profound pain of them started to become evident universally. Until then, it was always somebody else who was affected. With the Nazis, for example, it was the Jews, the homosexuals, the deviants, the prostitutes, the gypsies, whoever. So if we do nothing, that's all evil requires. So let me give you an example of somebody that I have great admiration for. This is Joan Halifax, Roshi Joan Halifax. And what you're seeing on the screen here is a photo of when she was arrested for civil disobedience just at the winter solstice in December 2019. She is a Zen Buddhist priest and writer. She's written some wonderful books on being with dying, how to cultivate compassion and fearlessness in the presence of death. And she couldn't do nothing in the face of the climate crisis that we're all facing as a species, as inhabitants of this earth. So she went to a climate protest in Washington, D.C., and was arrested there along with 137 others. And this picture of her came out on the internet, and people said, well, why are you laughing? You seem to be grinning. Why are you so happy as you're being led away by these police officers? And I'm going to read you her response to this. She said, there were two reasons I was smiling. I was not grinning. Rather, I was completely at peace in this very complex situation. As I was being pushed by a policeman across the foyer of the Hart building toward a processing area where for an hour I would be made to stand with everybody else in order to be fingerprinted, check if I was carrying a weapon, and so forth. Two things were clear to me. What a joy it is to live your principles, arrested or not. And what ease there is in being congruent with one's values. So as she was being led away, the smile on her face is from joy and ease at being consistent inside herself with her external actions, even though an external authority, here, the police, is in disagreement with her. So here is an example of somebody who aligned their inner authority with their highest divine authority, and that was peaceful. And just in case you think, well, I'll just sit it out anyway, here's what Dante has to say about this. Dante Alighieri: the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in times of great moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. And that's from The Circles of Hell, the book that Dante wrote on what awaits us in the afterlife if we aren't moral citizens. So avoid Dante's prediction for you and engage. Don't sit it out or pretend to be neutral when there is a time of great moral crisis. Okay. So let's continue into the slightly less scary parts of this. Why are we doing ethics? So ethics can help you work out where you stand. That's why we're having this conversation here. This is why this evening will hopefully be of use to you, so you can sleep better at night, so you know what it is that you represent, and you are consistent in yourself, like Joan Halifax, even if the external authority disagrees, or even if they do agree. Your alignment. So I'm going to just quickly explain to you what ethics is traditionally from a definition point of view, and then we're going to start working through the dilemmas together, which is how we're going to be spending the most part of our time here. So ethics functions like a moral compass that's subject to conscious and structured examination. So ethics is to morality the same as musicology is to music. You can enjoy music and live it, just like you can enjoy your morality and live that. And then musicology is the study of it, the understanding more theoretically of it. And that is what ethics is to morality. So ethics are a huge part of my life because I do scientific research. So anytime that I want to conduct an experiment in neuropsychology in laboratory, I have to get ethical permission to do that. I have to write out the entire protocol of what my participants would be subjected to, how I will deal with any reactions that they have, how I'll make sure that I'm respecting their rights as participants, as private citizens. So ethics also can be considered values, norms, institutional regulations that regulate and direct our professional, academic, and scientific activity. Ethics didn't used to be a thing in research, you know. I don't know if you all heard of the Milgram experiments in psychology. Very famous. It was, I think it was in about the 1950s or 1960s, I forget. But essentially, there was a scientist, psychology researcher, who was very curious about whether what was going on in the Nazi trials could be true. So there were Nazis who were being taken to court, and their defense was, well, I killed all of those Jewish people, delinquent people, etc., because I was told to. I had no choice. And the courts were hearing this, the courts of human justice, and saying, can that be true? Can it be that just because we're told to do something that is amoral and awful and terrible to another human being that we do it? So Milgram was this psychologist who was interested in testing the theory, and he set up this test where he recruited completely normal people, just civilians, to come into a lab. And the setup was that in one room, there was a person who they pretended was hooked up to a small electrocution device. And it had various settings. So from very mild electrocution, where it's just a little buzz on their fingers, through to mortal levels of electrical current. And so the participant would come into the other room and be told that the experiment was to try and test if people learn better when they are subjected to a bit of pain when they get the answer wrong. And so there was a man standing there in a white coat in the room telling the participants, make the participant recite these words. If they get it wrong, you press this button here with a bit of mild electrocution for them. And they couldn't see the person in the other room, but they could hear the sounds. And it was extraordinary that I think it was something like over 60%, maybe even more, of the people who participated in that experiment were willing to go up to lethal levels of electrocution, even as they were hearing the other person in the other room screaming and crying and then going eerily silent. They continued to administer this electrocuting voltage to them just because the man in the white coat was telling them to. And this is shocking, you know, and this experiment has been conducted again and again over the decades in more ethically correct versions where they don't make it go up to those sorts of lethal volumes of electricity, but still, the principle still stands. People like you and I, when we are put under the right conditions, become incredibly brain-controlled, mind-controlled by a perceived external authority, and it renders our capacity for moral judgment almost defunct. we forget ourselves in that moment because of the pressure and the conditions that we're in, particularly if it's a group. So again, it is so important to understand where your moral basis is so that you can remind yourself when you're out there hearing things and participating in things in life, is this right? Is this kind? Am I kind as I'm doing this? And if you can answer both of those questions, am I kind as I'm doing this? And is what is being done right here by other people kind? Then you can get a pretty clear answer on what this situation is about. So that was a little bracket just to tell you ethics are actually relevant across much, much wider areas than just some philosophical discussion club somewhere. This is for you in your ordinary life, particularly as you go forward and you start dealing with other people. So we get to the bit where you have to explore yourself. Now here comes the sort of personality testing part of this. This is all unofficial, created by me, but hopefully you'll get something useful out of it. So an ethical dilemma is when you have a decision-making problem between two possible moral imperatives. We'll talk about what that is in more detail, but for now, just know that a moral imperative is something that has a lot of power behind it because it's an accepted norm or something that is very strong for you because of where you come from in life. So it's something that if you don't follow it, there is a sense of immorality going on. But the ethical dilemma arises because neither of those decisions allow for an unambiguously positive decision to be made. So neither of them is unambiguously acceptable. In fact, the complexity arises because of the conflict where if you follow one, you're transgressing the other, and vice versa. Otherwise, it would be an easy decision. So there are some common expressions that capture this. For example, being caught between a rock and a hard place. And another one that's interesting historically is being caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. So it's an unusual phrase. I was fascinated to find out where it comes from. There isn't a definitive answer, but the one that has the most kind of logic behind it is actually from nautical terms, from sailing. So when you have a boat, a large boat out sailing on the sea, there is a large part of the boat that's underneath the waterline, but there's the bit that's above the waterline. And that part of the boat there also needs very regular treatment to make sure that the splashing of the waves and the exposure to humidity doesn't make the wood, because this was back in the days of wooden boats, that it doesn't rot. So what they would need to do is hang a sailor out over the top, and that top plank of the boat is called the devil. It's from a Dutch word, so it doesn't actually mean the devil as in this guy, but the devil is a piece of wood that is the top plank. So if a sailor was out restoring, scrubbing, painting this bit of wood there between the top part and the sea, he was caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. So anyway, just a random historical fact for you. So what would you do? Here we go. There are 5 of these dilemmas in total. And as I said at the very beginning, these actually come from my practice as a therapist and a healer. I have changed them very slightly to preserve some privacy for my clients. Their confidentiality is important. And I've slightly dramatized it in some places to make it more of a pressing dilemma than it may have been. But all of this is stuff that pretty much really happened. Okay. So I'll present the dilemma to you, and then you're going to have some options afterwards of how you would react, and then we analyze it together. So to begin, those pieces of paper that you got, just prepare them so that you have a color code on there so you can score yourself. So on your piece of paper, unless you have loads of colors, you can just write blue, orange, yellow, white, black, brown, purple, because you're going to be giving yourself scores for each of those color codes as we're going through. Okay, so the colors are blue, orange, yellow, white, black, brown, and purple. Those colors in themselves are not significant. You'll see why I chose those colors later, so don't make it like a thing in your head that white is good and black is bad. We're not in any of those paradigms at all. Okay, so blue, orange, yellow, white, black, brown, and purple. So you're going to be giving yourself +1, -1 as we go along. I'll explain. Okay, So there's an examples. Your piece of paper may end up looking like this, and at the end we'll tally it all up to see what your scores are in each of the color categories. Okay, so here we go. Dilemma number 1, an early client. So a client arrives 24 hours early for a morning healing session. So she has arrived at your house, my house, 24 hours early. She's obviously mistaken the day. And she's outside the front door, ringing the doorbell and knocking repeatedly. You're still in your pajamas after a disturbed night's sleep, in my case, because you were probably up 2 or 3 times tending to your 2-year-old daughter, Lily, who may have been quite restless, and you look a mess. You're certainly not ready to see a client. To top it off, the dog has decided to pee on the carpet, so your whole house smells. So if you were even to open the door and let the client in, not only are you presented in an awful way, but your whole house is totally unsuitable for human habitation at that point in time. Okay, it's pouring down with rain outside. She is standing outside the door getting more and more wet as she is knocking and ringing the doorbell. She continues to knock angrily, and there you are, a few steps away behind the door. Dog smell, pajamas, disheveled hair, all the rest. What do? So just have a think about this for a second, and then on the next screen, we're going to start to go through some options. Just let this land in your system and think, okay, what would you do? I don't want you to be too pre-programmed by the options that I'm going to show you, so just have an idea in your mind already. Do you open the door? Do you not open the door? Do you say something? Do you hide? Do you hope it all goes away? Do you send out the dog? What do you do? Okay, so here are the answers that I'm going to ask you to choose from, and I'm going to ask you to choose 2 of these that might apply to you, okay? And then at the end, I'm going to also ask you to choose the one that you definitely wouldn't do. So here they come. For blue, would you let her in? Of course, and just deal with it, because leaving her in the rain is dishonorable, and my dignity comes second to that. So as I read you these answers, of course, it's also about what the action is. So the blue one opens the door and lets her in, but it's also about the energy of it. This energy is about leaving her in the rain is dishonorable, and my dignity comes after that. I have to let her in, and then I'll just deal with the consequences. Okay, that's blue option. Orange option, so feel the different energy of this. I would speak kindly to her through the upstairs window, or the side window, or whatever, and ask for her patience and her understanding and for her return tomorrow. So that's a little bit of a, yes, I would deal with her, but I'm not going to have her in. She'll still be in the rain, but I will be kind. Okay. Yellow, hide. Wait for her to either return tomorrow or email me to find out what happened. She will learn to check her diary, and I get to keep my dignity. Wonderful. Okay. So that one, waiting for her to go away, not opening the door on this basis that she'll get something useful out of that, learning to check properly, and I get to keep my dignity. Good long-term result. White option. First and foremost, I have to get her out of harm's way so she doesn't catch a cold. Then I'll figure out the rest. Okay. So the white option is about getting her out of harm's way and then figuring out the rest. This is similar to the blue option, but the energy is different. Here it's because there's a fear of the client's well-being. The blue one is more about honor and duty. Okay, we have a few more. The black one. Here the person's saying, how did I deal with something like this before? Is there anything that I could kind of refer back to that would give me some insight? Well, okay, I will let her wait till it's the right time, because that's what I always do with early clients. I don't let people in early because I'm usually in the session before. I don't pick up the phone early because I'm usually occupied. So in this case, I'll do the same. So again, here the person is left outside, but it's for a different reason. Okay, here comes the brown one. I take into account what I know of her story. She was already quite pushy by email when she was booking in for this session. So now I'm going to set a firm boundary and leave her outside. So here there's something else, right? She's not going to get away with more than she was already getting away with. I'm taking into account the story between her and I that has already happened. And finally, the purple one. she has the right to decency and to help planning ahead with her day. So I tell her through a little crack in the door that it's the wrong time. So I'm supporting her with some information that she doesn't have, because she has the right to a little bit of support. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to go out of my way to change anything. I'm just going to get her away from the misunderstanding. Okay, so that comes from a more supportive, I'm just going to update her on some stuff she's misunderstood kind of place. Okay, so which one of those is your top one? Which one of those is your second one? So on your score sheet, put down +1 next to the two that are most like what you would do. And then I also want you to choose which one you would definitely not do, okay? And put -1 next to that one. So for example, if you definitely wouldn't hide and wait for the problem to go away, -1 there. Or if you definitely wouldn't take her in because you're not caring so much about her catching a cold or whatever, -1 on the white one, okay? So once you all have that, so now you should have +1 and +1 next to some of them, and then -1. I'll tell you what I did. So I actually didn't let her in. For various reasons. It was mainly because of the brown reason. We were already having a little bit of a thing where she was pushing boundaries. And it was also because I thought I want her to take responsibility for this herself, because otherwise this is me beginning already to rescue her and go out of my way on the journey. So I hid and I waited, and she went away, thankfully. And then she did turn up 24 hours later, and I was so curious to see if she was going to say something. And I thought, well, this is diagnostic for the beginning of our therapeutic relationship here. Is she going to tell me that she was there the day before? And she never did. So I know something about this client from the onset because of what happened there. Okay, now this is some time ago. Whether I would still do exactly that now, I don't know. Okay. So we're going to analyze it a little bit together, so you get an insight now that you've had your instinctive response into how you can work with this in a more cognitive way, okay? So what are the tensions that are going on here? Why is this even a dilemma? Well, we have on the one side the client well-being, and that is about getting her out of the cold and wet. We also have something to do with communication clarity. You may have even other reasons that I've not put here, okay, for both sides. So something about communication clarity, letting the client know that her appointment is the following day helps her get on with her day, and also make sure that she turns up the next day when you're really expecting her. So communication would be served by creating clarity right now. So on the one side, you've got something to do with the well-being of the client and the relationship in the short term, right here, right now in the moment. But on the other side, there is something here about your professional standing, not being seen as a mess as you are there in your pajamas, looking like a complete mess, not having slept enough. And also something about, and this is important, people often forget this in their kind of ethical deliberations, respect for the profession. Because if you open up the door and look like that, and your house smells like that, and the client gets that impression, she might begin to think that that's normal for the profession that you represent. And you do have a duty, and this is the same for scientists and researchers and anyone who's involved with the public, of safeguarding the reputation of your occupation. So what you do can very easily become representative to a client of what all people in your job or your profession would do. So there's also an ethical duty to take that into account. So that's what you have on the other side. And you could say in a way that's more something to do with the ability to be of the best service you can to this and other clients in the longer term. This client could have very negative transference on you from the beginning if she sees you in that kind of state, you know. And actually what happened with this client was it went very, very well. We have established a pretty good rapport for further work now, although this piece here remains unspoken. Okay, so the essence of this, to really sum it up, this first dilemma, we have an essence between, do we prioritize the now or the later? What is good for now and what is good for later? Is there a way to reconcile that? Maybe some of the approaches you saw on the previous page did that a little bit for you, and maybe the perfect answer wasn't there. Okay, so I would love to hear from you in the chat, if you will. What are the colors that you've chosen so far? Somebody asked in the chat, am I ever going to mention it to her? No, I'm not. Unless she brings it up, I'm not going to mention it because it's going to unveil something that she's chosen to keep private from me. So that would be calling her out on it. So I'm leaving it to her to provide me with that piece of information. So we have a blue. Any other colors? Of course, I know what the colors stand for. This is so purely for my pleasure here to know what kind of choices we have. Orange and brown. Interesting. Orange and purple. You're such kind people. So it's really not about opening the door or not. It's about where your reasoning is coming from. There's a lot of oranges here. Orange and purple, another one. Purple and white. Somebody said yellow -1. So somebody definitely wouldn't hide. Oh, is it just me who did that? Okay, blues, oranges. Somebody says I didn't feel any enough about the client. Okay, you want more to make the decision. Here, you could imagine that you didn't really know anything about her. It's just happening on the doorstep. So sometimes it's not that you can make a kind of really premeditated decision. You just have to act and do something, right? Okay, we've got blues, browns, whites, purples. Okay, interesting. So there's nobody so far who has black. I think every other color, and nobody chose yellow positively. Okay, interesting. We carry on and keep tabs on this as we go along. Okay, dilemma number 2. This also really happened. This was very complicated. This was towards the beginning of my practice. Okay, so there was a long-term client of mine who happened to be my year 4 case client, as it happened. So I had a very long-term relationship with her. And she was telling me that she had this current friend, as she called him, and she had now found a more attractive lover. So it was interesting, her choice of words. She was saying friend for somebody that she was obviously having some kind of sexual relationship with, but there was somebody else that she'd found that she was liking more. Okay. Then she's told me that she wasn't going to let the friend know, but she was going to slowly ghost him. So this ghosting thing means that it's basically beginning to ignore somebody, not answer their messages, and just slowly disappear out of their life like a ghost. So it's not a very kind thing to do. It's not a kind thing at all, actually. It's just disappearing without a trace, and the person doesn't really know what happened. So this was her plan for dealing with this situation where she's found a better lover. Then the next day, this friend turned up at my practice for a session as a new client, and I had no idea that it was him. So I started doing an intake with this person, and because of what he was telling me, I started to put 2 and 2 together, and suddenly I realized, oh my goodness, this is the same person. And he was completely unaware that the female client, his lover, the one that she was calling friend, was also seeing me. So now I have these 2 completely different people who are unaware that the other one is also seeing me. And he tells me that he's going to go and buy a very expensive custom ring, which cannot be returned. You know, when those of you who buy custom jewelry know this, you can't go and get your money back if you commission jewelry. And he could really not afford it, but it was a sign of his huge love and affection for this woman. He wanted to propose to her. He wanted to marry her. And he says, during this session, I would like your help energetically to prepare for this surprise proposal that he was going to make. What do you do? Just think about that for a moment. Where do you go with this? They have no idea that the other one is also seeing you, let alone any idea that you know what the other one's intentions are. And he's now here in front of you wanting your help to prepare for this proposal that he's going to make, this very expensive ring he's going to go out and buy as a sign of his love. And her plan is to ghost him because she's found another lover. Okay, get a little bit of a sense of that for yourself. I'm going to give you the options, you know, and you find the ones that work best for you. Okay, here we go. Blue. The rules are clear. I cannot breach confidentiality, so I cannot tell him what I know. So I do my best to make the session useful for him because that's my duty as a healer, as a therapist. Okay, my duty is to support him in the moment. I cannot breach her confidentiality by telling him what I know. No way. Okay. Orange. I celebrate with him his capacity for deep love, and I appeal to his courage and his strength, no matter the outcome of his proposal. Okay. Yellow. I will channel guidance during this healing that all might not be well with this lady, and I hope that he acts on this guidance. It's a small lie, but it's for a good cause. Okay, so I'm not breaching confidentiality. I'm just channeling something that something is whispering in my ear during the healing, and maybe he will act on that. So I've actually not done anything bad, but I hope that it works out for the best for him. Okay, white. He is heading for a painful experience, but he makes his own adult decisions, so I support him as best he can. So here's something about him being responsible for his own actions as an adult. He might be a bit blinded by love, but he still has capacity. So he's going to learn, like most of us, through painful experience. I'll do my best for him. Black. This does not meet the criteria for breaching confidentiality based on other cases. I happen to know the UK law around when I can breach confidentiality, and this is neither money laundering, acts of terrorism, nor is it drug trafficking. So therefore, I can't say anything. So I'm just going to have to proceed like I don't know how. Okay, that's the black one. And then next, brown. I subtly ask him about previous relationships and proposals that he might have made to other women to discover whether he has a story of rejection going on. So I'm not going to say anything, but I'm going to try and find out what the story is about in his life that has led to this very, very awful point. And then purple. She has the right to privacy. He has the right to financial stability, i.e. not ruining himself without knowing that that's going to happen. So I'm just going to suggest that maybe a cheaper ring might be a good idea, just in case the proposal fails. So I'm not going to breach confidentiality. I'm just going to be logical with him and say, can you really afford this? What if it goes wrong? I really wish you the best, kind of thing. So help him understand the situation and maybe educate him about some other options. Okay. All right, so choose your two, and if you would write them down on your sheet of paper with your +1s and also share them in the group chat, along with, of course, the one you would definitely not do. Okay, so in all of these, we are giving 2 plus points and 1 negative point for the one we wouldn't do. Okay, somebody's going for white, yep. So he's going to have a painful experience like we all have in life, and he's an adult, so I'll support him. Lots of you saying, definitely not the yellow one. I think the yellow choice is getting a reputation. And some of you are going for the orange. Oh, you're so kind. Orange and white ones. Some of you saying, because of conflict of interest, none of these choices is quite the right one. Okay. Then try and go for the ones that seem the closest, just so you get the right amount of points to do the tally with at the end. I know they're not going to be ideal for all of you. Choose the two that are least far away from what you would do. Okay. Brown and purple, but not yellow. Yeah. Okay. Somebody's saying they definitely wouldn't do the purple one. They wouldn't suggest a cheaper ring. Fair enough. Okay. Yep. All right. So make sure you've got it written down, and we're going to go into the analysis of this one here, okay? So what is the tension? Why is there a conflict here? Well, I'm going to write you down my analysis, and you may have other things that you can think of here that are on the two sides of the argument for you, okay? So here there is obviously an issue around client confidentiality. You have no right to share your long-term case client's thoughts with this person. No right, legally, on any basis. And also, this client who's come to you here, he's not asking you about whether he should go ahead. He's asking your support in how to proceed. And those are totally different questions. So you always have to support your client with the needs that they present and not what you think is a better option, at least to begin with, until you're on board that there might be deeper things to work with. But that's why you bother getting a client presentation in the first case, okay? So we have something there about maybe passively allowing painful lessons to be given and learnt by your clients, which can be really heartbreaking when you're in practice. You know, it's almost like letting your children go out and fall over in the street because you can't tell them to slow down all the time. But I guess that's how we learn gravity. Yeah. And on the other side, there is something here about client well-being. He could be very deeply hurt and take a very large financial blow from this. And who knows how he would react to that? This is the first time you're meeting him. What's going to be the long-term consequences of something like that happening? There is perhaps something in his story that means that this could be the final straw for him. Or does this become the bit that kind of rocks his boat completely over into capsizing, and now he can't handle his financial situation, and then it's a downward spiral for him? And something also perhaps about you. Have you been complicit with your long-term client's unkind behavior? How did you perhaps react? Does it sit comfortably with you when she said to you, I'm going to ghost this guy because I found a better lover somewhere else? Did you laugh with her? Did you just go, oh, okay, well, you know, that's up to you? Is there something here in you that says, I cannot be complicit with allowing this kind of behavior anymore? So you could say, in a way, are there shadow aspects of her that you were colluding with that you need to look at? Okay. So on the other side, that says that maybe there is some kind of active intervening that needs to be done. Now, we're not saying exactly how, but is there something active that does need to happen somewhere in these painful behaviors that are being acted out or experienced by your clients? So what do we really have here from my analysis? And again, you may have other ways of looking at this, okay? This is just where I got to with this. Something between allowing and intervening. And it takes us to a very profound question around what is healing? Is it always for a healer to intervene to create the healing? Or is the healing something about a holding of an external framework that allows the person to experience their life so that healing can arise in a different way than what you might think is the best way? And that applies all the way through to clients who may be facing death. It may not be possible that healing is sustaining their physical presence. Maybe the dying process has some of the healing within it. These are very, very big questions. But you will encounter this, the allowing versus intervening dilemma. So I will share with you what I did. This was very, very early on in my practice. This was my case client, like I said, so I was just finishing year 4 at the time. The problem solved itself. At the time, I supported him as best as I could. I went for the orange option and celebrated that he could feel such wonderful feelings of love. Said, you know, whatever happens, I want you to really feel your courage, you know, who you are as a person. And whatever happens, that's what I want you to really stay with and feel that. And that's how I supported him during the healing. And the problem solved itself because the next time I had a session with my long-term client, she turned up and said, he told me that he had a session with you. Oh no. And she realized that I now knew that he was in this completely different situation to her. He was so emotionally attached. She kind of knew that but didn't want to look at it. So we actually got into a very interesting examination of the shadow aspects in her that had allowed her to treat him in this way, a bit like an object that she could just kind of have her way with and then throw away when she was done. So it actually became a very useful conversation, but it kind of solved itself because he told her that he'd had this wonderful healing with this person called Marcus that lived in that building there. And she was like, oh, so the truth came out, as it often does. Okay, so we're going to go for the next one. All right, here comes dilemma number 3. Now, this really happened. This is so surreal, but here we go. I share this with you to give you a little example of the stuff that happens when you're out there in the wild with clients. So I had a lovely, lovely long-term client who I so liked working with, and I was trying to do everything that I could to support her. She really mattered to me. And she was suffering from chronic back pain. And this had been going on for years. And it was kind of pretty bad to the point where she was spending most of her time inside. So I was doing everything that I could to help. She'd tried all the conventional painkillers, she'd tried acupuncture, she'd gone through so much to try and regain a sense of ordinary life, but this chronic back pain was really, really getting her down. So we used to speak a lot about what to do, how to be with it. Is it her spiritual path to suffer? You know, what could she possibly do? And she'd come to the conclusion that she would really, really like to try some kind of edible cannabis. Now, she didn't know where to get it, and neither did you. Okay, no idea where to procure anything like that. But she'd come to the point in herself where she said, you know what, I'm willing to try anything. And I've heard that cannabis has pain alleviating effects. Now, she couldn't smoke for various other health reasons, but she thought if she could eat it, then maybe it could help her with this pain, at least as some kind of muscle relaxing way. So there she was. That's the point that she'd come to. Now, we didn't know what to do. We were kind of just there with, okay, well, that sounds like an idea. Maybe you try and find that then. A new client came into my practice, and he had quite low self-esteem. So we were working with various things to try and boost him a little bit. And at the end of the session, he offered to pay me with home-baked Italian-style cannabis cookies. Now, in my client contract, it doesn't say anywhere that I receive payment in anything other than bank transfers, PayPal, cash, okay? So he was obviously deciding to try this, and he was so pleased with his creations. He was telling me how Italian heritage, and this is his grandmother's recipe, and obviously not with the cannabis, he'd added that himself. So here he is. He hadn't brought them, but he said, you know, they're kind of in the car outside. I can go and get them if you're willing to receive payment like that instead. I swear to you, you'll never get anything like anywhere else. Okay, now I'm not somebody who partakes in cannabis cookies myself, but of course my client came to mind. This particular client actually has a reputation as a very, very excellent bakery chef, and he only provides these to people that he personally knows. So the dilemma then is that the cookies might be exactly what your lovely long-term client might need for her pain, having exhausted all other options she could possibly think of. And here is this client offering these to you as payment, so you don't even need to go and find them on a dodgy street corner or whatever. They're right there in the car outside the house. What do you do? Have a little think. For some of you, this might be a really easy answer, the one way or the other. Just have a little sense of this. What do you do? And then we'll go through the options. Okay, so here we go. Option blue. Are you kidding me? I'm not going to handle drugs. My duty is limited to providing healing for payment in money. Pretty simple. Okay, that's the blue option. Orange. I recognize with him his creativity and his resourcefulness while refusing his offer. My other client is learning the virtues of patience and courage, and that's okay. Right? So recognizing the gift that he has to try and boost his self-esteem a little bit and allowing my long-term client to be on her road. The yellow one. I kind of nudge him a little bit to take a referral for his bakery business so that she would be allowed to get them from him. Remember, he said he doesn't deal with anybody he doesn't personally know, but maybe I could convince him a little bit to take a referral because I know her. And that would give them both a good result, and it keeps me out of it. So good long-term result to hook them up, but I am in the clear. Okay, the white one. I respect he only deals with people he knows. That's his right. And my other client won't come to more harm than she's already in. She already has pain, and that's kind of where she's at. So I just ask for normal payment. So I respect where both of them are, and that's that. Okay, the black one. I once did accept cryptocurrency payment because that's what the client could offer me, but cookies are not cash. I can't legally justify selling them to my other client because that would be then dealing drugs. If I were to receive them as money is one thing, but if I then sell them on to my other client and get some money for that, then I'm actually a drug dealer, okay? So I cannot legally justify doing that, although I've received other types of strange payment in the past. Okay, brown. This client has a marginalizing story. He's somebody who has a story that he tells himself about being marginal in society. He's cooking cannabis cookies and doing that a little bit in a gray zone. And I'm not going to be complicit with that story. So I'm going to ask him to pay in the most proper way possible, which is a bank transfer. Because if I receive his cash, who knows where that cash has come from? And also, rescuing my other client by becoming the procurer of her cannabis cookies keeps her a victim. It doesn't help empower her. So based on both of their stories, I'm not doing this. In fact, I'm going to make him pay in a really proper way to make sure that the story of him being marginal in society doesn't propagate. Okay, I'm adding a little bit more context to this one because I couldn't write all that, but it's, I want you to get the nuance of it. And finally, the purple one. This client needs support to understand what's suitable behavior. He clearly doesn't know that that's not suitable. So I educate him and I trust that my other client will find a way forward for herself. Okay, so what are your pluses here and what would you definitely not do? And maybe there isn't the perfect answer here, but try and choose two that are closest to what you could imagine that you would do on the basis that they're explained here. I can see you're all thinking a little bit about this. Remember what your instinctive answer was before I showed you all of these, okay? As well. There was something that maybe arose for you when I first said, what would you do before you saw all this? So we've got brown and purple. Yeah, purple. Somebody would do the white one. Yep. Anything that you would definitely not do here? We've got another brown as well. There's a lot of you choosing browns and purples here in these stories. Somebody would do yellow. Yep. And somebody would do not yellow. Yep. Somebody would definitely not do blue. Okay. So this whole kind of moral high ground, I'm definitely not going to do this kind of thing. Somebody would do yellow, but not the purple one. Okay. All right. Good. I'm loving that this one is slightly more complex, and the other ones you were more clear about what you wouldn't do, even though you had multiple choices of what you would. Here we're getting into more of the complexity of it. And I guess you're also taking into account here what you know about life and what you know about all sorts of things, colorful things in life. Okay, what have we got here? Yellow and brown, definitely not black. Okay, and then somebody would do yellow or orange, but not blue. Okay, great. We've got a real rainbow here for this one. Lovely. Somebody would do yellow and orange. Okay, I love that combination of yellow and orange. Okay, very nice. We're going to analyze it a little bit together. Okay, we have, again, this is my analysis of the tension. You might feel it differently. I just offer this so that you can think about it more cognitively. Of course, on one side, we have some legal issues here. Maybe in the country that you live in, this is not a legal issue at all. There are some countries where I guess using cannabis and products like that is legal. And if you only have the amount that you would use for yourself, it's okay. Maybe it's even legal to gift it to another person. But I can tell you, at least in the UK, if you are going to be providing drugs to the other client you're supplying, and that's not legal, particularly if you're selling it. And also you have the issue here of if you're not calling your client out on this, you're also being complicit with the gray area of his operation. So do you have some kind of legal duty to say to him, actually, that's not legal currency in this country, what you're offering me there? And there's also, like we had before in the first scenario, respect for the profession. If you let the client pay using drugs, what statement are you making about healers, about therapists, about people who help others in life? Okay. What if that information got out that you received payment in that kind of way? So we have a consideration here on the one hand for the general setting and the legal framework, the profession that you work in, okay? Something about the generality of this, what is allowed from the bigger sense, what serves the bigger sense. And on the other side, we have something about client well-being, perhaps. If you were able to somehow make this work out, you could be facilitating a potential avenue to reduce your very dear client's chronic pain. you also have something about client rapport for this guy. You know, is there a way of celebrating his talents by saying, my goodness, of course, you know, like your unique talent is as good as money? Or maybe that's more tenuous, but I was trying to find things to balance this. So recognizing him for his talent, that certainly also counts. So there you're up against considering the individual needs of the clients that are involved here. So what we get to in the tension here is something about the more general, the non-personal, and then the individual. What is happening here in this case? And maybe that's also why it was a little bit more complex in terms of the answers that you gave. Some of you more on the individual, some of you sticking more with the general framework here. This is where it begins to get really complex because you're the one making the decision. Okay, we're going to do one more and then we're going to start going through what your answers mean. Okay, so this dilemma here was definitely not funny. This, when I think about this still, I get very uncomfortable sensations inside my body because, oh, it did stuff to me. So let me tell you what happened. So there was a client. So I forgot to tell you what I did in the previous one. Well, I told him, no, I cannot accept your payment as cookies. But what I did tell my client, the very long-term one, is that there are people who make these kinds of cookies and there may be places that you can go to get them, which you kind of already knew, but I said somebody like that turned up in my practice. So they are out there. So if you were to put the word out amongst your friends and the people that you know, maybe somebody will be able to hook you up with somebody. I can't do that for you myself. And she understood. And he also understood the boundary that I'm not going to be accepting payment in this kind of way. He was a funny client because every time he'd been in my home practice, I asked people to take their shoes off downstairs. The house stank of cannabis because for some reason his shoes really smelled of cannabis. It was crazy. So we got to the point where I asked him to leave them outside. I mean, you know, that's life. So yeah, it ended up fine in the longer term. She managed to actually find somebody through somebody who was able to assist her with this. And it did help. It's not solved her chronic pain problem completely, but at least it's an avenue for her. So it was a good ending, and I managed to not incriminate myself in any way. So coming back to dilemma 4 now. So this is a client who I've worked with for a period of time. This is quite recent, which is probably why it stinks so much. And he was kind of semi-depressive. He would go in and out of phases where he wasn't really feeling very positive about life. And other times he was more able to engage and level. And he basically read an article somewhere or other that said that laughter is good for the body and the soul. Now, of course, as a neuropsychologist, I'm incredibly aware of that. Laughter has lots of positive health effects. There are wonderful stories of people curing themselves from cancer by shutting themselves in a hotel room with loads of comedy films and just laughing and laughing because it's such a boost to the immune system. So I was completely with him as he said that. I was like, yes, absolutely, absolutely. I love that you've read that. How wonderful. Then he said, I would like you to laugh with me for 3 minutes non-stop in our session today. And it's fine if we need to fake laugh to begin with. At this point, my heart sank because I wasn't feeling kind of very funny. I mean, we tend to laugh a lot with this client anyway. You know, we had a kind of humorous sessions, but laughing on command for 3 minutes because he wants me to did something very uncomfortable inside me. And then because he said, oh, you can just fake laugh to start with, it's fine, and then you'll really get into it. Now, I don't know if some of you have done laughter yoga before, but it's on the same principle. You just basically make the mechanical movement and sound of laughing, and then you kind of get into it and it becomes real laughter. But it wasn't sitting very well with me. And I felt a bit of pressure from him, you know, and I wasn't in a particularly humorous mood. So it was like he was forcing me into this, and it didn't sit well with me. And he's sensitive to rejection. You know, he wasn't going to take it very well if I kind of said, you know what, I'm not going to go there with you. You know, that would land in a very sensitive place and not really serve the rapport that we're building up. Tricky. So he's looking expectantly at you now and begins counting down from 3. So that you can begin fake laughing. And there's some of you in the chat room who are already laughing at this, okay? So he is now 3, 2, 1, ha 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 ha. I'm sitting there dying. It's so awful. Oh my goodness. What do you do? What do you do? And why? Okay. This didn't have a very good end, by the way. I'm still processing this with my supervisor. Okay, so what's your gut response to this? Just check for yourself, okay? Do you go along? Remember, you're not feeling very funny. You're feeling pressure. He's decided you're going to laugh. It's going to happen now. It's fine if you fake laugh. La, la, la. Okay, somebody's saying laughter is contagious. You're going to try. Yes, but he's kind of waiting for you to begin, okay? Ha, 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 ha. Awful. Yeah, there's some boundary issues that are going on here. For sure, yes. Somebody's saying they wouldn't if they wouldn't want to. Yeah. Somebody's saying change the subject. Oh, look out the window. I'm sure I saw a blue alien. Did you see that? Maybe it was a sign from our guides. Oh, okay. Anyway, let's go through the options. Okay. So here's what we've got. Blue. Oh. Okay. So the blue person says that's a perfect opportunity to go the extra distance for my client. I can really push myself out of my comfort zone here. There's nothing wrong with that. It's good to go beyond the call of duty and really turn up for your clients, you know? No harm for me to explore some new territory. Let's go for it. Ha 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 ha. Number 2, orange. My client has worked hard on his path and it's charitable to support this request that he's making. He's not somebody who normally pushes beyond. So here he's making a request. The inner smile that I have for my client easily turns into laughter with him. How spiritual is that? That's not what I was able to do in the moment, by the way. Yellow. I think of how ludicrous this situation is and how I'm going to tell my colleagues about it. And that results in me laughing out loud at the silliness of the situation. The end kind of justifies the means, okay? I'm now laughing because I'm thinking of telling people about it later. White, I make my own decisions. So I warmly encourage his laughter plan and I tell him, I'm just going to be myself here while I'm supporting you. Okay. Black, I've read stories about how healers and therapists going out on a limb with clients and then magic happens because you went beyond. Okay, I'll try. Ha, 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 ha. Okay, so you've heard stories that magic happens if you push beyond. So you decide to give it a go. Okay, brown, you hear an inner voice. You'll betray yourself again and then blame him. So I just stop him right there to discuss the roles that we're playing in the drama triangle right now. The drama triangle being that somebody's the perpetrator, the bad one, somebody's the savior, the good one, and somebody's the victim. And right now I'm about to cast myself into victim and him into perpetrator, although he wants me to be the savior. And if I say no to him, I'm going to become the perpetrator because I'm not saving him. We need to get out of this triangle. So because my inner voice is saying, I stop and we talk about this. Okay? That's the brown one. The purple one, he might just not have learnt about consent. You can't just make people do stuff without getting their consent. And he might be struggling with empathy. So I slow him down and make sure that we're in true contact before we do anything else. Okay? Let's have your answers, please. Somebody's saying, blue, yes, no hurt for me and being there for him. I go beyond. And I think -1 for contact. Is that the purple one? And somebody's saying white and brown. Okay, own decisions. So this is somebody who's not going to just laugh because the client wants them to, but slow it down, think. White and purple, making own decisions, slowing it down, teaching him some stuff. Somebody's saying not yellow. So I'm not going to make myself laugh by thinking about something else. Okay. Somebody else doesn't like the yellow. There's a few oranges, whites, a lot of whites here for this one. Somebody has white and purple, own decisions. There's quite a few of you with that configuration. Somebody doesn't like blue or yellow. Okay, so not going beyond for the client, pushing yourself, and not using something else to make yourself laugh. Okay. White, purple, good, and not yellow. All right. Is there anyone who had plus for yellow on this one? Is there somebody who would find another way to make themselves laugh so that it becomes genuine? Somebody doesn't like black. Okay, going out on a limb, hoping for magic. Yeah. Okay. Somebody's taking yellow in a positive sense. Okay. So finding another way to make the laughter happen to get over it, the end justifies the means kind of thing. Okay. Quite a few of you don't like the black one either, hoping magic happens by pushing beyond just because it happens to others. All right. Nice. So actually lots of responses, both on the plus and minus side here. Interesting. If I wasn't, somebody said if they weren't actually going to tell their colleagues afterwards, I'd use yellow. Yeah, sure. You don't have to tell your colleagues. I'm sharing it with you here, of course. Oops, but there we are. The client is anonymized. Okay, so let's analyze this a little bit then. Where is the tension? So on one side, we have something that's really important for you as healers and therapists and training. You have to think about your self-congruence. Are you consistent inside and outside? Or are you doing something completely different inside to what you're displaying? So if you don't feel like laughing, you would be forcing yourself if you're doing that. And that's really not good therapeutic practice for you. Secondly, what about the authenticity in the client relationship? If you're being inauthentic just to please the client, that's not good modeling for him. In fact, you're probably being complicit with something that happened to him where he learned that it's okay to use people like little laughing boxes or objects. So something about bringing in an authentic person into the relationship again, so that people aren't just objects to be used. You wouldn't be able to teach him that if you went along with this in this kind of way. So there's something there about respecting your own boundaries and the authenticity here in the relationship. On the other side, client rapport. This guy really wants your companionship and approval in this exploration. So there's a wonderful opportunity here of building that with him by going along on something that he has taken an initiative for himself. Somebody who's generally quite depressed, taken an initiative and wanting to change things through laughter. That's almost a miracle. So here you have an opportunity to support him with that. And also just warm-heartedness. Somebody said before we even went into the answers, maybe laughter is good for the soul. So why wouldn't you engage? It's not like he's asking you to hurt yourself, is he? So on the other side, something here about going beyond your own boundaries and comfort zone. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Isn't that where we learn? So here, if you're going to analyze it really down to the crunch, you get something about self boundaries and client building. Okay. Do you stick with your own boundaries very tightly, or do you loosen them for the client's sake to a certain extent, right? So again, this is not about right or wrong. I'll tell you what I did, which is why I'm still struggling with this. I stopped him. I said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I wish that I could join you in this right now. I just can't find it in me to laugh on command. And we have such a warm-hearted relationship already. Now I'm feeling so self-conscious about laughing. And I said to him, I wish I could be more elevated, like the Dalai Lama or something. I'm sure he would sit here laughing with you. So I humanized myself and just said, I'm so sorry, I can't meet you there right now, but I love your initiative. And then he said to me, well, at least, Marcus, you're cheaper than the Dalai Lama. Fine. But I wish I could have found a way, and I couldn't. It hit me somewhere where my own stories around going beyond my boundaries and betraying myself was still too alive. And that's something that I still try to balance. It's one of my edges. Where do I betray self? And where am I just stretching my boundaries? So it's still not always so elegant for me. And that's why I'm still thinking about this one. I wish I could have found the perfect way. It didn't turn out badly, but there we are. Now, of course, whenever we do sessions, this client and I, laughter is a thing. Moving on. This final dilemma here, I'm going to present to you. Somebody said in the chat, best not to betray self. Yeah. And when is betraying self and growing as well? That's the crunch, isn't it? So this dilemma here, I'm not going to give you the answers for it to score yourselves. Instead, I'm going to present it to you, and then we're going to start going through the different answers that you may have given before to identify your character types from an ethical perspective, okay? So I'll just present this, and then we'll start seeing. So again, this really happened. On a Skype call, an insomniac client asks for healing for sleep problems, okay? So this is a client who has huge problems sleeping, and he wants some distance healing while you're on a long distance Skype call together. And he's really keen that after the healing has finished, you give him your observations about what happened in the healing. He wants to debrief with you. So he wants you to let him know when the healing is done so that you can make contact. And he has high anxiety and big issues with trust. So you promise that, yes, you will absolutely let him know you're finished, and there'll be at least 5 minutes to talk about what happened during the healing. Fair enough. Probably you can guess what happened here. After he settles onto his lovely reclining chair, you begin sending healing. And then he falls asleep for the first time in 3 days. And you do your healing, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, it's so wonderful that he's sleeping. But I've got a problem, because now there are only 5 minutes left before I need to disconnect Skype, and there's going to be a call waiting for me for my next session. What am I going to do? Okay, you think about that for yourselves for a moment. You can see the problem here. On one side, we have client rapport. You might lose his trust if you don't wake him up and talk with him, because you promised that you would wake him up and spend 5 minutes talking to him about the healing. And there's also something maybe about client safety and well-being. If you just leave him sleeping and you disconnect Skype, he might miss other appointments. He might even have left some food on the stove cooking. He could be in physical danger from something catching fire. Who knows? So there's something there about honoring your client's expressed wishes, the deal you consciously made with them. But on the other side, what about your client rapport? He might get really angry with you if you wake him up because he specifically asked for healing for sleep problems. What better healing than to actually let him sleep? And then also, again, it mirrors the other side exactly. There is also a client safety and well-being problem because he really needs any sleep he can get after that many days of insomnia. I don't know if any of you haven't slept ever for 3 days in a row, but you get delirious. You start seeing stuff that isn't there. You can get really paranoid and make really bad decisions. You actually begin hallucinating. So he could have an accident or fall ill if he doesn't catch up on sleep soon. So something there about honoring your client's unexpressed wishes. If he'd known that he was gonna fall asleep during this healing, what would he have told you? But you didn't even think that this could happen. So the tension here is something to do with the conscious and the unconscious client wishes. Can you act on what they said or what it is that's underneath that? And that gets to be very tricky territory. Do you know better because you're in contact with something deeper in your client than what they consciously know? And you always find this in healing and therapy. You get into situations where the client tells you what they want, but because of your experience, because of your intuition, you sense that there's something else under that. So you could say this is the way in, but it's your journey down to that it's going to be all about, trusting your instinct there. But of course, what you believe your client needs can never override at the same time what it is they're saying, because otherwise you don't have any rapport. You don't have any client alliance going on. You've broken it. So tricky things to balance this. So I want you to add up your scores now, okay? We're going to see afterwards what you score for this one. Somebody's saying there's a difference between demand and need. Yes, but is the client always going to be aware of the need? You would choose the need over what the client demands. Yeah, that's often what you end up doing actually, but you have to be able to justify it afterwards. What happened with this client, by the way, I'll just tell you while you add up your scores, is that the problem solved itself because 30 seconds later, he woke up. And I was so relieved because then we could have the little debrief. And he said to me, oh, I think I started to fall asleep. I said, I think you might have started to doze off just then. So let's not have too much of a debrief now. I'm going to send you an email with a few notes. And I want you just to continue lying down, relaxing, if everything is fine in your house. He was like, yeah, let's do that. So I left him hoping that he fell asleep again. If the situation hadn't solved itself, I might have had to wake him up because I wouldn't have left him and just disappeared off Skype. It wouldn't have been, for me, the right thing to do. He could have been in some kind of danger or missed appointments and I would have broken my promise. Okay, so add up your scores and find out where your highest scores are, which are the colors that you consistently rated highest, and which is the one or the ones where you had lowest scores, okay? And what you can then do when you've added it all up is make an order for yourself from highest through maybe 0 through to the lowest. Okay, so you have a little bit of a sense of your moral background. All right, and I'm going to start moving forward now because we're in a little bit of a hurry to get to the end now. So we're going to now talk about the ethical types that exist, okay? And as you know, this is being recorded. So if I go a little bit fast now, this is going to go up on YouTube later. So you can go back through this and pause the screens with the information on so that you can get more detail. So I'm just going to go through these to make sure that we end by 7. So your types. Those of you who had the highest score for blue consistently or the lowest score, this is what you liked or really disliked. So I've chosen the police officer as a symbol archetype of this. So deontology comes from the Greek word deon, which is obligation or duty. And it states that people should always adhere to their obligations and duties to another individual or to society. So duties, for example, a deontologist will always keep promises to a friend and follow the law, okay? Because that's the duty. A person who follows this theory will produce very consistent decisions because they're based on their set duties as an individual. So they're very easy to predict what they're going to do. And this theory particularly praises people who exceed their duties, going beyond the call of duty. The police officer running into the middle of some kind of dangerous situation gets a medal, doesn't get told off, you know, and that's called supererogation, going beyond the set duties, sacrificing yourself for others. But the problems with this theory is that there is no logical basis for deciding what an individual duties are. It could be that the law says one thing, but your religion says another. So your duties could conflict depending on who it is that sets those rules for you. And sometimes the person will follow their duty without regard for the welfare of others. The other's welfare doesn't come first, but it's your duty that you've identified that comes first. Okay? So moving on. What would be the deontology response to this dilemma? Well, I'll leave you to think about that. What would a police officer archetype do with this person who hasn't slept for that long? I'll leave you to figure that out. Orange, virtue ethics. So I've chosen a Buddhist monk for this. Virtue ethics are based on what a good person would do in specific real life situations. And this kind of ethic stems from character traits that have really traveled through time and are very consistent as good qualities. Aristotle, Plato, Thomas Aquinas identified some of these. So they're timeless and they go across cultures. For example, courage, wisdom, justice, faith, charity, and temperance. Temperance means you don't throw a tantrum when you get angry. Okay, so really virtues for me that are incarnated in the Buddhist tradition, specifically people who will really go beyond their self to cultivate those virtues. And what this theory also does is it judges a person by their character rather than an action that might deviate from their normal behavior. So for example, with the client who wanted to laugh, he'd never asked me to go beyond my boundaries before. So from a virtue ethics perspective, he's earned the right maybe for me to make an exemption for him. However, if somebody always has bad behavior, does it then allow you to take into account that they might change their moral character? Okay, so if somebody, you're giving them exemptions, but it's because they're actually exposed to a really negative environment and their lower self is really taking over, do you continue giving them exceptions on that basis? So that's the problem with virtue ethics. If you're always judging on the person's character, what about if that character begins to change over time? All right, so I'll also leave you to figure out what a Buddhist monk would do in response to the dilemma with this insomniac client who's sleeping. Okay, now consequentialism, the yellow one. This was very controversial for a lot of you. I chose a fireman for this, and I'll explain why in just a second. Consequentialism is also known as utilitarianism. Here, the consequences of your conduct are the true basis for any judgment about the morality of it. To make this very simple, the end justifies the means. So a morally right act, or something that you don't do, is the one that produces the best overall outcome. So not so much about what you do in the moment, but what it leads to. That's how you're judging yourself. So for example, the fireman will break down your door, damage your property in order to get you out and potentially save your life. Now that sounds obvious, but there is still a short-term bit of damage that's being done for a higher purpose. Okay. Now, the problem with this is, how can we possibly know the consequences of our actions? To choose one. You might have heard of the butterfly effect. A butterfly flaps its wings, and on the other side of the world, there is a hurricane. So We cannot pretend to have the mind of the divine and see across all the timelines what the consequences will be. So if you follow a consequentialist approach yourself, you have a moral imperative to inform yourself as much as possible about the situation before judging the appropriate course of action, understanding really where your clients are coming from and what it would mean for them if you chose for the end to justify the means. Okay. Again, I'll let you think about what the fireman approach might be to this dilemma here. And then principlism, the white one, this is something that's used very broadly in medicine, okay? So it's a system of ethics based on 4 moral principles. They are autonomy. Everybody has free will and agency, unless they're not competent from a mental perspective, in which case somebody else needs to stand in for them. But until that's proven, they have autonomy and free will. Number 2, beneficence, do good, promote welfare for people. And if you can't do that, then at least don't. Number 3, non-maleficence, minimize harm or don't allow for any harm to be done at all. Number 4, think about justice, the social distribution of benefits and burdens. And this is a real big question now in times of the coronavirus. Who is it that's being chosen to be put on a ventilator when there is a shortage? Those are awful, awful decisions that medical professionals have to make a fair social distribution of the resources that are available. A terrible situation to be in. These 4 principles are used by many moral decision makers and are actually compatible with most intellectual, religious, or cultural beliefs that exist on the planet. These 4 here, they are principles. Okay. Again, what would the kind doctor do in this situation? And then we're getting towards the end, casuistry. This is the black one. So here we have a judge or a lawyer, if you like. Casuistry uses a case-based approach. So you're always thinking about what other cases happened before that remind me of this and how did they work out? Essentially, how can I inform myself by what has gone before to get an insight into what is here? And that's very useful in complex situations with lots of competing demands, like, again, the medical setting. You've got a doctor, a patient, a family, society, the hospital, the government, legislation. How do you balance all of those influences? So there is a process that you follow that allows users to find a common ground to begin deliberation. So it's not just like, you should do this or you should do this, but we begin by finding a common ground to start from, by classifying the event. Is it just a small individual problem, or is it an international pandemic we're looking at? Identify the presumptions that are in place. What are the things that you believe without even questioning them? Commenting on the circumstances that might be affecting your judgment. Do you have a personal involvement with somebody who's in this? Do you have a history with this that might color your judgment? Reflecting on opinions of other authorities that have gone before to see what the moral basis was in those decisions. And then you make a verdict based on all that. So you see, it's almost like case law. You build up a case based on what has gone before. So again, you can imagine what a judge might make of the dilemma with the insomniac client. And then narrative ethics, the brown one. So here we have an interviewing journalist, somebody who's getting information from people, listening carefully. So in narrative ethics, there's a focus on the patient or the client as a unique individual with a story that got them to where they are. So this looks a bit like casuistry, but it's different, because in casuistry, it's about what has happened before in other cases. In narrative ethics, it's about that person and their story through life. Doctors have to often use this narrative approach because they're trained to work by starting with the particular patient in front of them and then finding out what principles might apply. For example, you might have 2 clients that both have high blood pressure, but for one of them, based on the story of their life, it would be a great idea to suggest that they do more exercise, stop smoking, blah, blah, blah. And for the other one, because of who they are and their narrative of life, you prescribe some medicine. Same presentation, but different story that got them to where they are. Therefore, different expectations of outcomes. So here, the person's story is recognized as really important, but you're also encouraging other voices to be heard. What is the opinion of other experts, the family? So you get the best chance of respecting everybody who's involved. But the problem is you're not going to get a fast answer, nor a definitive answer. It's more of a kind of empathic, co-created, co-authored solution over time as more information comes in and people find a way to compromise on it. Okay, that's narrative ethics. You can imagine then what a journalist who's interested in listening to the story might make of the insomniac client. And then finally, rights ethics. We're all at the end now. So where does right ethics come from? It's about the dignity that all humanity should be treated with, according to 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant. And he said, here is the rights-based moral principle. Humanity must always be treated as an end in itself, not merely as a means. Never do you use another person simply as a means to obtain an end. So rights ethics are based on the system of claims on others that are justified by the individual and society. So I'll quickly give you some examples. Negative rights is when there is a negative duty imposed on others, which means you do not have the right to take away what is mine. You do not have the right to pry into my privacy, and you do not have the right to take away my life. Okay, so those are negative rights that we have where another person stays away from what is ours in a conceptual or physical sense. And positive rights are claims that each person has for the assistance of others in fulfilling the basic constituents of their well-being. For example, like the right to health. These are human rights enshrined in the Constitution of Human Rights, okay? Health, education, freedom. So, but what is the point of having those rights if there's no means given to make them happen? So therefore, in rights ethics, people deserve support and welfare to help them achieve at least a basic level of these positive rights. And that's why the person I chose to represent this is a teacher, because providing education and helping people understand is a basic foundation of them getting on in life. Okay, so that was the purple one. The problem is, of course, that not everybody agrees we have the same claims. And that's why there are so many different political systems on earth. There are social democratic systems that provide a very high level of welfare. I come from Denmark, where it's quite all right if you're unemployed and you can actually live very well on unemployment benefits, but taxation is also extremely high. And there are other countries where it's quite the opposite. If you don't work, you have nothing. There is no catchment, but the tax is also much lower. There isn't that kind of distribution of welfare that happens. So you can figure out what would a teacher's response be to this kind of dilemma. So I'm going to sum it up for you as we come to the end of the presentation for today. Remember that your knowledge of ethics gives you a moral compass based on what you hopefully now has an insight into your own moral foundation. I hope that the color ranking that you gave taught you something about yourself. And of course, you must take into account what the law, your spiritual path, your professional associations also require of you, so that you can balance these. And when you understand your own moral compass, it supports your self-congruence, being the same inside and outside, which places you in a position of integrity. And it also gives you a basis on which to act. Remember that sitting on the fence in neutrality is not an option. You can choose to not act because you've thought it through and decided that non-action is the strongest thing you can do. In fact, strong acts of civil disobedience often involve sitting around and blocking places and doing nothing. So you get a basis on which to act, even if you are the only one that climbs up that hill with your flag that holds your moral foundation on it. You might be the only one, like Rosa Parks, who sits there and says no when the conductor says move. Who does what is needed, like Rosie Joan Halifax, who goes and gets herself arrested because she couldn't not do it, because it was the right thing internally and externally for her to do. Because of what you know, because of the insight that you have into a situation, and because of who you are. And on that basis, I'm going to finish just as a little reminder for you. You must use your reason. Identify where the tension is in the dilemma. You must use your heart, your emotion. Trust your instinct. And you must use your will. Do what is needed, even if what is needed is to sit and be. So this is something about balancing what in Brennan's school is called balancing your three modifiers, but sit in the center of that. Use your reason, use your heart, and use your will. And on that basis, I want to thank you for turning up. And remember, the world needs you to be you. Without you, we can't all do this together. And I just want to say as a little bracket, for those of you who are choosing a lot of the brown and purple options, you have the makings of good therapists, because those are the approaches that you use as a therapist. And in these times also with coronavirus, you know, there are huge questions, ethical questions that are being put to us. We are all being asked right now, well, many of us, to not go outside, to not pursue our normal life. And that is an infringement of our personal freedoms. We are being asked to choose, perhaps, the common good over our own short-term discomfort. And most of you, I'm sure, are supporting that by helping the people who are really vulnerable to not get infected by doing this social distancing protocol that's in place. But that's a place right now where it's a big struggle for people who have a strong story about their personal freedoms being neglected or not heard. And then to have to choose some kind of anonymous, vulnerable masses over their own personal freedom can be a huge problem. So these are things that are important to think about all the time and now. Okay, thank you. So on that basis, I will let you go, and I will try and get this up on YouTube soon so that you can share it. You're really, really welcome to share the talk both from yesterday and today with your dear ones, with whoever you like, in case you think they might be of inspiration. That's what it's here for.